Hello and welcome to our session on updating your environment to a new format, the new format of environments. Now, if your environment is around 9 months old or older, like from 2022 or the beginning of 2023, then the chances are it's the old style environment. Old style environments have a main.runtime file and often a preview.runtime file. They are aspects, they're kind of very bit specific components, and they have all this kind of bit specific syntax. Now, the new style environments are much simpler, as we're about to see, and they also take advantage of a whole load of features and performance improvements that BIT has been implementing over the last, over 2023 essentially, and will carry on implementing over 2024 and the coming months and years. So it's very much worth updating to the new environments. Once you do that, you will also be able to take advantage of some of these new configurations and features that we've added to the workspace JSON C. Have a look at our previous video on updating BIT for implementing or getting those configs. So let's dive into creating a new style environment. So you're on bit create react env, my new react env. Maybe add a namespace to that so that kind of gets added in your scope in a nice little folder inside the scope. And we'll run enter there. This is going to create a new style environment. It's bit create. This is the name of the template. This is the name of the component that's going to get produced, and this is where BIT is going to fetch that template from. So the React Env, the new React Env, has a template called React Env, and that is a template to create a new React Env. It all kind of sorts together. I'm not going to kind of do one of these things where I fast forward the video and kind of push to when it finishes and all that, just because I want to show you how quick this is. This is very quick. You see that I have my new component, my new environment. It is going to be under here, my scope envs. Here we go, my new React env. Where is it? Why is it under my scope? Just because in the workspace JSON I have default scope as my scope. You should make this all dot scope. That should be an actual scope, and then it will be under the scope name over here. Anyway, so this new environment, if we're going to compare it to the main.runtime file, which is the kind of the main file of the old style environments, this is the main file of the new style environments. What you'll see here is that there's just import statements and there's just a class extending another class. There's various things to make things easier, like just kind of telling you the path to the tsconfig is inside the config file. And this we can move down to the bottom. And here, inside here, there's just functions, and these functions are being implemented from the core React env and being overridden here. Now, if you don't override it, you can just comment out any of these functions, and then we use the core React envs compiler, for instance, the core React envs tester, the core React envs linter. And in fact, these custom environments from the template are set up to be a copy at the beginning when you start with. At this stage, they're an exact copy of the core React env. And I'll show you how that works. For instance, with tsconfig, here we have a TypeScript compiler. You tell TypeScript compiler, take the config from this location, which is over here. All this does, it inherits the TypeScript config from the React env, which is the core React env, and then there's any customizations that you want to add in. These are actually just what's in that React env. You just have to run it. You have to add it again, so that's why it's here. But this is essentially exactly the same setup as the core React env, but everything's in front of you. So if you want to customize something, all you need to do here is customizing tsconfig. Now it's just an actual tsconfig customization. Like it's a real tsconfig. There's no bit specific anything to this. It's just how you would do it in any tsconfig setup. Same thing for all of the toolings here. It's just a regular ESLint RCJS file. And this is how you extend other ESLints, and then you just add your own modules and rules, etc., like any other ESLint file. Same thing, Prettier, Jest, Webpack, etc., etc. And so how do you then tell your environment about these configs? Well, in the old main runtime, you'd have all sorts of interesting kind of modifiers you'd have to add. You have a react.use TypeScript, which will then update the TypeScript. There's some very specific syntax. What you have here in the new setup is that you literally just tell BIT where to find the config files. So for the compiler, you tell BIT, I want to use a TypeScript compiler. That's BIT's TypeScript compiler. We also have a Babel compiler available. And for instance, for our Svelte support, we've created a Svelte compiler. For Stencil support, we've created a Stencil compiler. Each one of those has a config that you can add to it, and then it will compile with the right kind of compilation that's required for all of those tech stacks. So usually you just have a TypeScript compiler, especially for React. And then you just give it tsconfig, and that's it. And you give it some types. If you have some extra types, you give it the types from inside here. and that's it. It just will record that. We'll use those types and then use them for all the components using that environment. That's the compiler. The tester is the same thing. You just give it a jest config. The formatter the same thing, formatter config, etc., etc. So that's all the configurations, and it's much simpler and much more native than the previous way of doing things, which was kind of very bit specific. Okay, dependencies. How do we override dependencies? How do you define dependencies via your environment now? Well, in the olden days, the old environments, you'd have an override dependencies, and you have to give it a dependencies object, and then that would also kind of need to somehow dovetail in the other overrides that you need to do, like setting dependencies and peer dependencies in certain ways. In the new environment, you have an env.jsonc file. This is the only file apart from the bitenv file that actually does some kind of configurations. And here we have some quite clever policies. You can read up more about how these policies work and what they do. Essentially, they're exactly the same. All your peer dependencies would be under the peers section, but now you have a few things that you can set. So you can have a supported range. This is what gets set in the components that are using this dependency. So they'll be set as a peer dependency in all the components that are using React with the range of 17 and 18. So what's this version? Often with the peer dependencies, you need your current component, your environment, to create examples of the component. And for those examples of the component, you need actually for this to be installed. You can't just have it as a peer dependency. So the environment becomes the consuming application. Once it becomes a consuming application, there are certain scenarios in which you want to tell the environment which version it's going to use. For instance, you want your components to be, in React, the case of React, you want the components to be compatible with React 17 and React 18, but right now you want your environment to be rendering it with the React 18 DOM syntax. So this React 18 version and React DOM 18, version 18. When you need to set this in as a specific value, you'll know you need to set it. If not, just set it at the same value as the supported range. Okay. The same thing with dev dependencies. You would add dev dependencies over here. A lot of dev dependencies, you need to add the force true. What force true will do is that even if bit doesn't recognize this dependency inside your component, i.e. it's not being used directly in your component, it will still add it to the component. And that is usually the case in most dev dependencies, like types files. You never reference types files directly inside a component, but you always want them to be set as a dependency for your component so that your component has the types available to it. And there are various other dev dependencies that you have that kind of thing for. And then you have runtime dependencies as well. We'll come to patterns in a minute. So that's how you set dependencies. Again, it's just like a regular object and its own specific place. And the reason why it's in the env.json is that this actually configuration gets loaded even before the environment itself can get loaded. So these dependencies are loaded at exactly the right time. And it removes a lot of kind of performance issues and sometimes some stability issues that there were previously in configuring dependencies via environments. Okay, so we've done dependencies, done tooling, previews. So the previous environments, we had a preview.runtime file, which is how you would customize how the previews of your compositions would be created. So for instance, if you want to add a theme to all of your compositions without having to add the theme wrapper around all of your inside every composition file, you would add it inside here. There's a provider, and then the register provider, reactor register provider, etc., etc. So now we've got kind of rid of that whole preview runtime file. Now, inside the bitenv file, you have a preview section. The preview section allows you to add a mounter, some host dependencies that you won't have to use too much, so we're not going to cover them in this video. You can actually also add a docs template. We'll see in a second what that might mean. And this is basically it allows you to customize everything in a very kind of native React way, or native whatever your framework is way. So for instance, the mounter. What do? You have the create mounter functions already given to you. That create mounter function can be given some providers, and this is just regular code. So what you give it is a regular React function component, and here you can add in, you can import, theme provider from whatever, or theme context. I've got some theme context that I want to add. So I can now add my theme context around all of my compositions, and the children here is the compositions. So you can React whatever providers you need around here, and this is just native React code, and then just provide that to your create mounter, and that's it. You have everything provided. If you want to include the CSS file, just import the CSS file into this, my org.scope, my porg, whatever porg is. Not sure what happened there. Backslash my CSS comp dot cs dot slash my CSS file. Actually, I have to change these to that. So this is just accessing a CSS file from a component, or you can have a CSS file internally in the environment, and that's how you add the CSS via the preview file, via the mounter. So it's all very native, again, native code, the same way as you do it inside any application. So that's your mounter, and the same thing with the docs template. Docs template will basically enable you to customize how the docs look, how the overview page looks in your component. Most people do not need to do that. And the build pipeline, previously inside the older envs, you'd have inside the main runtime file, you'd have a React update build pipeline. I haven't even got it here. Let's have a look if I can. React build override build pipeline. So you have all sorts of things inside override build pipeline. You'd be able to add tasks, take away tasks, but it wasn't clear what the build pipeline actually looked like and what you were adding to or taking away from. Here in the new environments, you just have a build section. The build section gives you all of the tasks. These are the tasks that are already added inside the core React env, and these are the tasks that you will have to just add or take away or update. And the configuration, again, is from the same place as the previous time. You can have a build-specific configuration, so you make a new tsconfig file inside the config, tsconfig.build.json, and then resolve to that, for instance. Inside here, it is a TypeScript task. Templates. I'm not going to cover templates too much. Just know you can register templates via your environment. That is done, for instance, by default, you get the templates from the core React env because you're extending it. It has over here a template section, 2 template sections, in fact. React env, I didn't actually go to it, but it has, inside the React env, it has its own kind of starters and template section. That's why you inherit it, because you're just extending that class, so you get the templates available inside your custom environment. And the last thing you can do over here is just nice thing at the bottom is you can define the file types that are detected by bit. So for instance, if you want to have a new test file type, let's say you already have lots of components with tests already configured for them, then you could, for instance, add the stories as tests and then import those stories inside test files in order to test out the various scenarios of your stories. And you want to make sure those stories files are not recognized as runtime files, but are recognized as dev files. And you can even add your own my dev files list, which won't be recognized as tests or docs or compositions, but will be recognized as dev files for whatever reason you want to have those recognized as dev files. So that's, again, all pretty easy to see and understand and use out of the box. And I think that's it. Then you are updated with your new env. What you need to do is now run bit install in order for the new env to be kind of well organized inside node modules. What I would highly recommend is actually deleting node modules and your lock file, because bit basically manages dependencies very differently with the new env and the new workspace configs than it did in the old one. So delete node modules, delete your lock file, and run bit install, and then your new env will be up and running. Then the last thing you to do is just make sure you replace the environment for all components using your old env with the new env, and bit has a nice syntax, a nice command for that, bit env replace. You give it the old env name, it will replace anything inside your workspace using that old env with the new env, and then that will set the new env for all those components, and just run bit compile, and you're up and running with your new environment. That's it.